Right now, as you're watching this, you're operating across at least 7 dimensions simultaneously. You just don't realize it. That moment when you randomly think of someone and they call, 5th dimensional frequency alignment. The gut feeling that saves you from disaster, 6th dimensional information download. That creative breakthrough that seems to come from nowhere. You've briefly accessed what Thoth called the halls of Amenti, higher dimensional libraries of infinite possibility. For over 4,000 years, this knowledge has been carefully guarded. The ancient Egyptian mystery schools taught initiates to consciously navigate these dimensional layers, but this wisdom was systematically suppressed and fragmented. Today, it circulates only in restricted circles. Quantum physicists call it non-local consciousness, while Silicon Valley elites use it for reality hacking. Meanwhile, most people remain trapped in third-dimensional thinking, believing success comes from grinding harder, accumulating more, competing endlessly. They're using a smartphone like a paperweight. The dimensional shift happening right now means this window won't stay open forever. Those who learn to consciously operate multidimensionally will thrive. Those who don't will find reality increasingly chaotic and unpredictable. Look, I need to tell you something that's going to sound absolutely wild at first. But stay with me, because this changes everything about how you see your daily life. Most people are walking around believing they live in what I call a solid reality, where the laws of physics are unchangeable, where cause and effect work in straight lines, and where, if you want something, you have to physically chase after it through effort and struggle. This isn't just a casual belief system. It's been carefully constructed and reinforced through every institution you've ever encountered. Think about it. From kindergarten onward, you were taught that reality works like a machine. Push this button, get that result. Work hard, achieve success. Follow the rules, get rewarded. Everything operates in neat, predictable sequences. But here's what Thoth understood that completely shatters this comfortable illusion. Physical reality is just the densest layer of a much more fluid, responsive system. When Thoth inscribed those emerald tablets, he wasn't just recording mystical poetry. He was documenting the actual mechanics of how consciousness shapes experience. He saw through what we might call the third-dimensional trap, this idea that you're separate from everything around you, that you have to fight against circumstances to create change, and that time moves in one rigid direction from past to future. But here's where it gets really interesting. Right now, as you're listening to this, a significant portion of humanity is already operating beyond these third-dimensional limitations without even realizing it. They're experiencing what researchers call fifth-dimensional bleed-through, moments where the old rules simply don't apply anymore. Let me give you the radio frequency analogy that makes this crystal clear. Imagine you're in a room with dozens of radio stations broadcasting simultaneously. They're all occupying the same space, but you only hear one station based on where you set your dial. Third-dimensional consciousness is like being stuck on one station, convinced that's the only broadcast that exists. But fifth-dimensional awareness, that's when you realize you can tune into completely different frequencies that were there all along. The difference between these dimensions isn't about location, it's about the quality of consciousness you're operating from. Third-dimensional thinking is characterized by separation, effort, and linear time. You see yourself as isolated from your environment. You believe change requires physical force, and you experience events as happening to you in sequence. Fifth-dimensional consciousness operates on entirely different principles: interconnection, flow, and simultaneity. Instead of separation, you start recognizing that you're part of an intelligent field that responds to your internal states. Instead of effort, you discover that sustained feeling states naturally attract corresponding experiences. Instead of linear time, you begin experiencing synchronicities and meaningful coincidences that seem to bend causality. Neville Goddard spent decades mapping this territory, showing how imagination isn't just daydreaming, It's the actual creative force behind physical manifestation. He discovered that feeling is the secret. Not thinking about what you want, not working harder toward your goals, but sustaining the internal feeling state of already having what you desire. This sounds like mystical nonsense until you realize it's describing how consciousness operates in higher dimensions. The problem is that everything in our culture is designed to keep you locked into the chase after it mentality. You want better health? Chase after it through diet and exercise. You want more money? Chase after it through harder work and better strategies. You want love? Chase after it through dating apps and self-improvement. But this entire approach assumes you're separate from what you want, that it exists out there somewhere, waiting for you to capture it through physical effort. What Thoth understood, and what's becoming increasingly obvious to people who are paying attention, is that achievements don't come from physical effort. They emerge from sustained internal states. When you can maintain the feeling of already being healthy, wealthy, or loved, the physical world rearranges itself to match that internal reality. Now, I have to mention something here. Some of the most specific and confidential aspects of how Thoth decoded these dimensional mechanics simply can't be shared openly on a platform like YouTube. The detailed techniques for consciously shifting between dimensional frequencies, the precise methods for stabilizing fifth-dimensional awareness, and the advanced practices for navigating what he called the consciousness grid, these require a different kind of communication. But what I can share here is enough to help you recognize the signs that this shift is already happening in your own life. Pay attention to the multiplying coincidences. Notice how certain conversations that used to feel normal now feel almost intolerable, like you're speaking different languages with people who are still operating from the old paradigm. Watch for increased physical sensitivity, where you can actually feel the energy of places and people in ways that seem almost psychic. Observe how your relationship with time is changing, how some days feel eternal, while others seem to compress into moments. These aren't random phenomena. They're signs that your consciousness is already tuning into higher dimensional frequencies. Your internal radio dial is moving, whether you're consciously directing it or not. Here's what most people don't realize. This transition is happening collectively. It's not something you have to individually achieve through spiritual practices or self-development programs. It's a species-wide shift in consciousness that's already underway. The question isn't whether it's happening. It's whether you're going to participate consciously or let it happen to you unconsciously. There's more to this than we can say openly. Some truths are too sensitive, too sacred for this platform. That's why we created Insights Academy, a free newsletter where we go deeper, where we share what can't be said here. And for a limited time, if you sign up using the link in the description, you'll receive a free copy of the Kybalion, a foundational Hermetic text. Thoth would have guarded himself. The old reality where you had to struggle against fixed circumstances to create change, that's becoming obsolete. The new reality where your internal states directly influence your external experiences, that's already here for those who know how to tune in. And the beautiful thing is, once you start recognizing these signs in your own life, you can't unsee them. The comfortable illusion of solid, unchangeable reality begins to dissolve, and you start living from a completely different set of principles. The same principles Thoth was trying to preserve for exactly this moment in human history. When you learned about dimensions in school, they gave you the sanitized version, a neat little package of length, width, height, and if you were lucky, time as the fourth dimension. Your teachers drew those clean coordinate systems on whiteboards, measuring boxes and calculating volumes, completely missing the profound reality that Thoth understood thousands of years ago. This mathematical convenience has created one of the most limiting misconceptions in human consciousness. We've been trained to think of dimensions as physical addresses, coordinates in space where objects exist. But that's like trying to understand music by only studying the physical properties of sound waves, completely ignoring the emotional and consciousness-altering effects of harmony, rhythm, and melody. Thoth, As the architect of sacred geometry and the mathematics underlying reality itself, knew something our educational system has forgotten or deliberately obscured. Dimensions aren't places. They're vibrational patterns of existence. They're states of consciousness that determine not just what you perceive, but the fundamental quality and organizing principles of the reality you experience. Think about this for a moment. When you're in a state of deep love, doesn't the entire world seem different? Colors appear more vivid, synchronicities multiply, and solutions to problems seem to emerge effortlessly. When you're consumed by fear or anger, that same physical world becomes threatening. Obstacles appear insurmountable, and you feel separated from everything around you. Same coordinates in space and time, completely different dimensional reality. The ancient Vedic texts describe this with remarkable precision, outlining multiple lokas, not physical locations, but interpenetrating realms of consciousness that coexist in the same apparent space. The Hermetic schools taught about subtle and dense planes of existence, while Christian mystics spoke of the many mansions in their Father's house. They weren't describing real estate, they were mapping consciousness itself. In the third dimensional state that most humans currently inhabit, you experience reality through the lens of separation. There's you, the observer, and everything else, the observed. This creates the fundamental illusion that you're an isolated consciousness trapped inside a physical body, subject to external forces beyond your control. Time moves in one direction like an arrow, from past through present to future, creating the experience of aging, decay, and scarcity. Everything requires effort. You push against resistance, struggle to make things happen, and feel exhausted by the constant battle against circumstances. Matter appears solid and immutable. Physical laws seem absolute and unchanging. Your identity gets shaped by external narratives, what others think of you, your job title, your possessions, your achievements or failures. You're constantly seeking validation from outside sources because the ego-based identity of third-dimensional consciousness depends entirely on external reference points. But in fifth-dimensional awareness, the game changes completely. The separation between observer and observed dissolves. You begin to perceive the invisible fields of connection that link all things, what quantum physicists are now measuring as entanglement, what indigenous shamans have always known as the web of life. Time becomes fluid, with past, present, and future coexisting as simultaneous possibilities rather than fixed sequences. Most remarkably, consciousness begins directly shaping events rather than simply reacting to them. This isn't wishful thinking, it's a measurable phenomenon. The HeartMath Institute has documented how coherent heart rhythms create electromagnetic fields that extend several feet beyond the human body, influencing not just other people, but electronic equipment. When groups achieve coherent states simultaneously, they can measurably affect random number generators and other quantum systems. In fifth-dimensional consciousness, creation arises from vibrational states rather than physical effort. You align with desired outcomes energetically first, and physical reality rearranges itself to match. This is why Neville Goddard taught that changing the world means changing yourself and nothing else, not because external circumstances don't matter, but because they're secondary expressions of consciousness rather than primary causes. We're witnessing this dimensional shift on a planetary scale. The Schumann resonance, Earth's electromagnetic heartbeat, has been fluctuating in unprecedented ways. For decades, it held steady at 783 Hz, but now we're seeing spikes reaching 36 Hz and higher. While scientists debate the causes, many researchers correlate these variations with collective consciousness expansions, moments when large numbers of humans simultaneously access higher dimensional awareness. This transition explains why everything feels so intense right now. Old problems keep resurfacing, not as punishment, but as expansion portals. In third-dimensional thinking, obstacles are walls that block your path. In fifth-dimensional awareness, they become doors that dissolve when you stop pushing against them and start flowing through them. The key is releasing attachment to drama and victim narratives. Every time you catch yourself thinking, "This is happening to me," you're choosing third-dimensional perception. When you shift to, "This is happening for me," or even, "This is happening as me," you're accessing fifth-dimensional consciousness where challenges become catalysts for expansion rather than evidence of limitation. Your nervous system is already adapting to these higher frequencies through neuroplasticity, literally rewiring itself to process more complex patterns of information. The question isn't whether you're capable of fifth-dimensional awareness. You're already experiencing it in moments of flow, creativity, deep connection, and sudden knowing. The question is whether you'll recognize these experiences for what they are and learn to stabilize them as your primary operating system. The dimensional shift isn't coming. It's here. You're not preparing for higher consciousness. You're remembering it. Here's something that completely shattered my understanding of how reality actually works, and it comes directly from one of Thoth's most profound teachings, hidden in plain sight within the Hermetic principle. As above, so below. Everything you've been taught about achieving what you want is backwards, completely backwards. You've been conditioned to believe in what I call the 3D paradigm. Identify your goal, create a detailed plan, apply massive effort, and eventually, if you're lucky and work hard enough, you'll reach your target. This linear approach treats desire like a destination you must travel to, step by exhausting step. But here's what Thoth understood about fifth-dimensional mechanics that changes everything. You don't pursue what you desire. What you desire is magnetically drawn to you when your internal frequency aligns with it. This isn't some fluffy metaphor. This represents specific energetic mechanics that are measurable in vibrational terms. Let me explain exactly how this works. In the third-dimensional paradigm, separation between you and your desire appears absolutely real. There's you over here, your goal over there, and physical distance that must be crossed through time and effort. You send out resumes and anxiously wait by the phone. You spend months visiting properties, making offers, dealing with rejections. You swipe through dating apps, going on awkward first dates, hoping someone will finally stick around. But in fifth-dimensional reality, this distance doesn't exist in any absolute sense. There are only fields of resonance, and when frequencies match precisely, potential collapses into manifestation almost instantaneously. Think about it this way. Your brain generates measurable electromagnetic fields. Your heart produces an electromagnetic field 60 times stronger than your brain's. When you achieve what neuroscientists call coherence, when your thoughts, emotions, and energy field integrate into a unified signal, you literally become a coherent magnetic field broadcasting at a specific frequency. Now here's where it gets fascinating. Everything you desire exists as potential energy vibrating at its own frequency signature. When your internal frequency matches that signature exactly, the universe doesn't have a choice. The magnetic pull becomes irresistible. I've watched this happen countless times, and the contrast is striking. Someone spends 2 years applying to jobs through traditional methods, networking events, online applications, following up with hiring managers. Nothing. Then they shift into fifth-dimensional operation. They stop the frantic searching and instead sustain the feeling of already being valued in meaningful work. Within 3 weeks, a former colleague calls out of nowhere with an opportunity that's exactly what they wanted. Or consider real estate. I know someone who looked at houses for 8 months, made offers, got outbid, dealt with inspection problems, financing issues. Exhausting. Then she tried something different. She stopped actively searching but maintained the vivid feeling of already living in her ideal space. The morning light through the kitchen window, the sound of her footsteps on hardwood floors, the sense of being completely at home. 2 weeks later, a property came on the market that wasn't even listed yet. The seller's agent contacted her directly because someone mentioned she was looking. This isn't coincidence. This is the direct consequence of operating as a coherent magnetic field instead of a scattered, effortful seeker. But here's what makes this so challenging for most people. You have to release compulsive control and trust invisible mechanisms. Your nervous system has been trained to equate effort with results. When you stop pushing and start resonating, every conditioned part of you screams that you're being lazy, unrealistic, irresponsible. The neurophysiology tells a different story. When you sustain coherent states, your brain produces alpha and theta waves that keep your perception open and dramatically reduce internal resistance. You start noticing opportunities that were always there but filtered out by a mind focused on struggle and scarcity. This is exactly what Neville Goddard meant by feeling the wish fulfilled. He wasn't talking about positive thinking or visualization exercises. He was describing a specific vibrational state you sustain until the outer world reflects that internal condition. The key is understanding that events still require physical action, but action becomes the natural consequence of aligned internal states rather than the primary engine. Instead of energy scattered into effort, obsessive planning, and resistance, all your power concentrates on maintaining vibrational coherence, and this requires tremendous precision. Vague intention produces weak signals lost in noise, but precise intention infused with authentic feeling generates coherent brainwave patterns, coupled with powerful heart electromagnetic fields. The signal becomes unmistakable. Here's what I mean by precision. Instead of, "I want a better job," the coherent signal might be, "I feel the satisfaction of contributing my unique skills in an environment where my ideas are valued and implemented." Instead of, "I want to find love," it becomes, "I feel the deep recognition and appreciation of being truly seen and cherished for exactly who I am." The difference isn't just semantic. These refined intentions create completely different vibrational signatures that attract entirely different possibilities. When you sustain this coherence, something remarkable happens to your relationship with space-time. Linear time stops feeling like a barrier. Events that would take months through conventional logic unfold in days because you're no longer operating within the constraints of step-by-step causation. This connects to something much larger that Thoth encoded in all his teachings. Physical reality responds to subtler consciousness instructions. Matter follows mind, but only when mind achieves sufficient coherence to broadcast clear, sustained signals. The magnetic reversal isn't just about getting what you want more efficiently. It's about recognizing that you're already operating in dimensions where thought, feeling, and manifestation are intimately connected. You've always been a magnetic field. The question is whether you're broadcasting coherently or just adding to the noise. Most people will read this and immediately start trying to apply the technique. But technique thinking keeps you trapped in 3D mechanics. The shift happens when you recognize you're already the magnet. You're just learning to align your field with what you actually want to draw into your experience. When your energetic system begins restructuring for fifth-dimensional living, there's nothing subtle about it. This isn't some gentle spiritual awakening that unfolds over decades. It's more like your entire cellular network receiving a massive software update, and every incompatible file gets flagged for deletion. Your body becomes the primary battlefield for this transformation. Old traumas that you thought were buried start surfacing with uncomfortable intensity. That relationship wound from 15 years ago suddenly feels fresh again. The grief you never fully processed comes knocking at 3 a.m. Your nervous system starts clearing decades of accumulated stress patterns, and it's not asking for your permission. But here's what Thoth understood that most spiritual teachings miss. These emotional eruptions aren't punishment or evidence that you're doing something wrong. They're your system's way of purging data that can't exist at higher frequencies. Think of it like this. Fifth-dimensional consciousness operates on a completely different energetic bandwidth, and certain emotional patterns simply can't translate. They have to be dissolved. The acceleration is unmistakable. Emotional cycles that used to take years to resolve now compress into weeks or days. You might find yourself moving through anger, grief, acceptance, and peace within a single afternoon. This isn't emotional instability. It's your emotional body learning to process energy at light speed instead of the sluggish pace you're used to. Your sensitivity to environments becomes almost overwhelming at first. Walking into certain spaces feels like hitting an energetic wall. That crowded restaurant that never bothered you before now feels suffocating. Your friend's apartment, where you used to hang out for hours, suddenly feels dense and heavy after 20 minutes. You're not becoming antisocial. You're becoming energetically discerning. This heightened sensitivity extends to people in ways that can be deeply unsettling. You start reading intentions through energy fields rather than words. Someone can be telling you they're happy for your success, while their energy broadcasts resentment so clearly it might as well be written on their forehead. This isn't mind reading, it's frequency recognition. You're learning to perceive the vibrational truth beneath social performances. The challenging part is that this sensitivity isn't optional, and it requires constant energetic hygiene. Spending time in misaligned environments or with people operating from lower frequencies doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It actively drains your personal field. You find yourself needing to limit exposure to certain places, media, and conversations, not because you're being judgmental, but because your system literally can't maintain its new frequency while absorbing incompatible energies. This brings us to what might be the most difficult aspect of the dimensional shift, the inevitable relationship realignment. Fifth dimensional perception exposes social masks with uncomfortable precision. Dynamics that you used to navigate unconsciously become glaringly obvious. That friend who always turns conversations back to themselves. The family member who uses guilt to control your behavior. The colleague who drains your energy with constant complaining. Relationships sustained by manipulation, emotional dependence, or savior-victim games become energetically exhausting. You don't necessarily have dramatic confrontations or burning bridges. Instead, you experience a natural drift. The frequency mismatch creates an organic separation that feels almost automatic. The most liberating realization that emerges during this process is understanding that you cannot save anyone. This goes against every codependent pattern you've been taught, but it's absolutely crucial for maintaining fifth dimensional frequency. Each person chooses their experiences at a soul level, including their pace of growth and awakening. Your attempts to accelerate someone else's development or rescue them from their chosen lessons isn't just futile, it's energetically expensive and potentially delays their natural evolution. Neville Goddard captured this perfectly when he taught that the other is always you projected. Trying to change someone else without changing yourself is like attempting to fix your reflection by adjusting the mirror image, instead of moving your actual body. The energy you spend trying to convince, cajole, or save others is energy diverted from your own transformation. Your emotional body undergoes its own metamorphosis during this shift. Old reactive patterns start clearing out like outdated software being uninstalled. Situations that used to trigger hours or days of emotional turbulence now produce brief, intense feelings that dissipate quickly. You might experience anger, sadness, or frustration with surprising intensity. But instead of getting stuck in these emotions, you find yourself moving through them like weather patterns passing through the sky. This creates what feels like a fundamental shift in your relationship to your own emotions. You begin operating more from an observer position, with space between stimulus and response where higher consciousness can illuminate choices you never noticed before. This prevents external conflicts from hijacking your attention and maintains the vibrational stability essential for fifth dimensional frequency. The internal coherence that develops from this emotional mastery produces external synchronicities that seem statistically impossible. Chance meetings, that solve long-standing problems. Opportunities appearing exactly when needed. Blocked situations unlocking automatically without your direct intervention. These aren't coincidences. They're the natural result of your internal frequency aligning with fifth-dimensional flow. In this dimension, there's no real boundary between your internal feeling state and your external living experience. Life responds like an amplified echo of your dominant frequency. When your inner world achieves coherence, your outer world reorganizes itself to match. This is why the internal work isn't separate from practical results. It is the mechanism that produces them. The signs aren't subtle because the transformation isn't subtle. You're literally rewiring your entire system to operate at a frequency that most of human civilization hasn't accessed yet. Pay attention to these shifts happening in your own experience. They're confirmation that you're already living the reality that others are still seeking. When you start operating from fifth-dimensional consciousness, something profound happens to your everyday experience that goes far beyond noticing more synchronicities or feeling slightly more intuitive. Your entire decision-making apparatus gets rewired from the ground up, and suddenly, you're living in what feels like a completely different reality, even though nothing around you has technically changed. The most dramatic shift happens in what I call the conscious observer space. In third-dimensional living, you're essentially on autopilot most of the time. Something happens, your boss sends a terse email, traffic backs up, someone cuts in line, and boom, your internal state immediately matches the energy of whatever just occurred. There's no gap between stimulus and response. You're reactive, which means your emotional and energetic state is constantly being hijacked by external circumstances. But fifth-dimensional consciousness creates this incredible buffer zone between what happens and how you respond. It's like suddenly having a strategic command center in your mind where you can pause, assess, and choose your response from a place of stability rather than reactivity. This isn't positive thinking or emotional suppression. It's accessing a fundamentally different operating system where drama literally cannot take hold because you're no longer feeding it with unconscious reactions. I watched this transformation happen with a client who used to spend hours crafting angry emails to difficult colleagues, then deleting them, then rewriting them, caught in these exhausting cycles of emotional reactivity. Once she stabilized in fifth-dimensional awareness, she'd receive the same triggering messages, but experience them completely differently. The content hadn't changed, but her relationship to it had. She could read the email, recognize the other person's stress or fear driving their tone, and respond from clarity rather than defensiveness. Her colleagues started commenting on how much more effective and pleasant she'd become to work with. This leads directly into what I call vibrational monitoring, becoming exquisitely sensitive to your own energetic state, and intervening the moment you feel it starting to drift from alignment. Most people wait until they're already angry, anxious, or depleted before they notice something's off. By then, you're playing catch-up, trying to recover from an already compromised state. Fifth-dimensional living flips this entirely. You develop this internal radar system that detects subtle energetic shifts before they gain momentum. Maybe you notice a slight tightness in your chest during a conversation, or a barely perceptible drain when scrolling through certain social media feeds, or a subtle agitation after spending time in particular environments. Instead of pushing through or ignoring these signals, you start treating them as valuable intelligence about what supports your alignment and what doesn't. This awareness forces some radical choices that can completely restructure your life. You realize that not every person, situation, or environment deserves access to your energetic field. The filtering process becomes vibrational rather than just logical or moral. You might find yourself naturally pulling back from social circles that operate on complaint, gossip, or drama, not because you judge them, but because maintaining your alignment becomes more important than maintaining familiar patterns. I've seen people completely transform their social lives this way. One woman realized that her weekly dinner group which she'd attended for years, consistently left her feeling drained and scattered. These weren't bad people. They were longtime friends, but the group dynamic had settled into patterns of negativity and victim consciousness that were incompatible with her evolving state. She gradually stepped back and instead started connecting with people who were also prioritizing their growth and consciousness. Her social circle became smaller, but infinitely more nourishing. The same principle applies to professional environments, living situations, even the media you consume. You become incredibly selective, not from a place of judgment or superiority, but from recognition that your energetic state is your most valuable resource. This isn't isolation. It's creating space for connections that actually amplify your desired frequency, rather than constantly pulling you down to lower vibrational states. Strengthening your energetic body becomes an absolute priority, but not in the way most spiritual teachings suggest. This isn't about following the latest wellness trends or accumulating spiritual practices like trophies. It's about developing a consistent, intimate relationship with your own energy, learning what sustains your vitality, what depletes it, and what helps you maintain stability regardless of external circumstances. For some people, this might mean completely overhauling their diet, sleep patterns, or exercise routines. For others, it's more about energetic hygiene, clearing practices, boundary work, or spending more time in nature. The key is that these choices emerge organically from listening to your system rather than following external prescriptions. As this stabilizes, you start accessing what feels like a multi-dimensional version of yourself. The separation between thought, word, and manifestation begins narrowing dramatically. Your speech gains immediate creative weight because it's emerging from aligned consciousness rather than unconscious reactivity. You notice that casual comments or intentions seem to materialize with startling speed and accuracy. Meanwhile, your old identity, the one shaped by conditioning, fears, and rigid self-concepts, starts dissolving in the most peculiar way. People often describe looking back at their previous concerns and behaviors as if remembering someone else's life. The mental chatter that used to dominate your internal experience becomes transparent, obviously not who you actually are. Ego illusions that once felt solid and real become clearly visible as temporary constructions. What emerges is this profound lightness and inner spaciousness. Not constant euphoria or bliss. That's actually a sign you're still in emotional reactivity, just on the positive end. Instead, there's this stable calm that becomes your baseline, with much less resistance to whatever the present moment contains. Circumstances that used to trigger anxiety or frustration are received as part of a larger flow that you're participating in rather than fighting against. This acceptance isn't passive resignation. It's the conscious choice to stop wasting energy fighting what's already manifested and redirect that power toward creating what exists in potential. When a critical mass of people operates from this frequency, it creates ripple effects throughout the collective field, ultimately affecting social, economic, and power structures that depend on keeping individuals locked in scarcity, fear, and reactivity. The invitation here is to start paying attention to these shifts, if they're already happening in your life, or to begin cultivating the conscious observer space if you recognize you're still mostly reactive. Your daily reality is waiting to be completely transformed from the inside out. Here's what Thoth understood about reality that most of us are just beginning to grasp. The universe operates on vibrational laws as precise and predictable as gravity or thermodynamics. These aren't mystical concepts reserved for spiritual masters. They're fundamental principles governing how consciousness shapes physical experience. The difference between living in 3D struggle and 5D flow isn't about special abilities or cosmic privileges. It's about recognizing and working with laws that are already operating in your life, every single moment. Think about this carefully. Every single external event in your life your relationships, your financial situation, your health, your opportunities, is a direct consequence of your internal vibrational configuration. Not sometimes. Not when you're being particularly spiritual. Always. There are no exceptions to this law, just as there are no exceptions to gravity, the chair you're sitting in, the job you have, the person you woke up next to this morning. All of these are vibrational matches to states you've been sustaining internally. This recognition completely confronts everything we've been taught about how reality works. Our inherited 3D logic places physical effort and linear control as the primary engines of achievement. Work harder, push more, force outcomes, manipulate circumstances. But 5D logic reveals these as merely the final extensions of what began in the vibrational field. The work, the pushing, the strategizing, they're just the physical echoes of internal states that were already established. Here's where it gets challenging. This reversal requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands your willingness to sustain internal states without any visible outer correspondence. You have to maintain vibrational stability while your external world still looks like your old reality. This is where most people abandon the process. They read about manifestation, they understand the concepts, but when their bank account doesn't change overnight, they conclude it doesn't work. But reaching this stability completely transforms your relationship with the physical world. Work stops being something you do to survive and becomes an expression of your creative essence. Relationships stop being sources of validation or security and become playgrounds for mutual expansion. Your body stops being something that betrays you and becomes a sensitive instrument, reflecting your internal harmony. Circumstances stop being things that happen to you and become feedback about your vibrational alignment. This shift dissolves the need to chase or convince. When you recognize that your external world is reflecting your internal state, your attention naturally moves to continuous field calibration as your most strategic action. Instead of trying to change people's minds, you change your frequency. Instead of forcing opportunities, you become the kind of person opportunities seek out. Instead of fixing problems, you stop generating the internal conditions that create them. This leads to what I call radical responsibility, and there's no room for blame transfer here. Each person begins to see themselves as the origin of their own experience, not in a harsh, self-critical way, but in an empowering recognition that if you created it vibrationally, you can change it vibrationally. Your difficult boss, your challenging finances, your health issues, they're all vibrational matches to internal patterns you've been running, often unconsciously. Now here's what happens on a collective level. As growing numbers of people sustain vibrational coherence, fear and scarcity-based patterns begin losing their support structure. This doesn't happen through instant collapse, but through gradual draining. When enough individuals stop feeding collective fear with their attention and emotion, those patterns simply can't maintain themselves. They require our vibrational participation to exist. But there's a crucial difference between knowing this intellectually and living anchored in this state. You might have moments of clarity where you feel completely aligned, where creation feels effortless, where you know with absolute certainty that you're the author of your reality. But then something triggers you, and you're back in reactive mode, feeling like a victim of circumstances. What prevents these moments of clarity from becoming permanent is the accumulated turbulence in your mental and emotional field. Imagine trying to see clearly through muddy water. The clarity is there, but it's obscured by disturbance. This is why regularly creating internal space where this turbulence can dissolve isn't optional. It's essential for sustained vibrational alignment. Meditation isn't occasional relaxation in this context. It's a strategic tool for vibrational alignment, a way of reorganizing your internal field so thought and emotion operate in coherence rather than conflict. When your mind and heart are pulling in different directions, you create vibrational static that scrambles your creative signal. Meditation restores the natural magnetism that draws in what exists in potential. This practice interrupts the reactivity cycles that keep you locked in old patterns. Instead of automatically responding to triggers with familiar emotional reactions, you begin to assume silent command of your creative process. You learn to witness disturbance without becoming it, to feel emotions without being controlled by them, to think thoughts without believing every one of them. This training gradually turns those flashes of connection into your predominant state. The 5D frequency stops being something you visit occasionally and becomes the fixed base of your daily experience. From this foundation, you begin to understand your role as a conscious co-creator, working in partnership with the divine intelligence that animates all existence. The most practical application of these vibrational laws starts with honest assessment of your current internal state. What are you actually sustaining in your thoughts and emotions throughout the day? What stories are you telling yourself about reality? What feelings are you marinating in? Because whatever you're consistently generating internally is what you'll continue to experience externally. This is Thoth's gift to us. The understanding that we're not victims of reality but active participants in its creation, operating according to laws as reliable as any in physics, once we learn to recognize and work with them consciously. You've learned about how 5D consciousness transforms daily reality and how vibrational laws govern creation itself. But here's where most people get stuck. They understand these concepts intellectually, yet find themselves pulled back into old patterns, like a rubber band, snapping back to its original shape. That's not a personal failing. That's programming working exactly as designed. Thoth understood something profound about human consciousness that modern psychology is only beginning to grasp. We're not born with limiting beliefs. We're systematically trained into them. From your first day of school, when you learn to sit still for hours despite every cell in your body wanting to move, to the career advice that steered you toward practical choices over passionate ones, you've been conditioned to operate within very specific frequencies. The ancient Hermetic texts describe this as the difference between living as a conscious creator versus an unconscious reactor. Most people spend their entire lives in reaction mode, reacting to circumstances, other people's moods, societal expectations, financial pressures. But Thoth's method reveals how to step out of that reactive loop entirely. Let's start with recognition, because you can't change what you can't see. Your conditioned responses run so deep they feel like personality traits. That anxiety when someone doesn't text back immediately, that's programming. The automatic, I can't afford that, when you see something you want, programming. The way you shrink back from expressing unpopular opinions, also programming. For the next week, become an observer of your own thoughts, not judging them, just noticing. When you catch yourself thinking, I should, ask where that should came from. When you feel that familiar knot of worry about money, trace it back. Was this your original thought, or something you absorbed from parents, teachers, media? Now let's talk about energy drains, because this is where most people leak their power without realizing it. Thoth taught that consciousness is energy, and energy can be gained or lost through every interaction. That friend who always calls to complain but never takes advice? Energy drain. The job that requires you to pretend enthusiasm for things that bore you? Major drain. The news cycle that keeps you anxious about things you can't control? Massive drain. But here's what's crucial. It's not about becoming selfish or cutting everyone off. It's about conscious choice. When you engage with energy-draining situations from a place of awareness, rather than unconscious habit, you maintain your power. You can choose to listen to that complaining friend for 20 minutes instead of 2 hours. You can do your job well without absorbing the corporate culture into your identity. The Hermetic principle, as above, so below, applies here. Your external circumstances mirror your internal energy state. If you're constantly surrounded by chaos, look at the chaos in your thoughts. If you're attracting people who don't respect boundaries, examine where you're not respecting your own boundaries. Protecting your energy field isn't mystical nonsense. It's practical psychology. Start each morning by consciously setting your intention for the day. Not just what you want to accomplish, but what energy you want to maintain. Before entering challenging environments, take 30 seconds to center yourself and remember who you are beneath the roles you play. Here's where it gets interesting. Every single moment offers a choice between old programming and new possibility. When your boss makes an unreasonable request, you can respond from the programmed people-pleaser pattern, or you can pause and choose a response that honors both professionalism and self-respect. When unexpected expenses arise, you can spiral into the familiar, money is scarce, panic, or you can breathe and ask, what creative solutions exist here? The key is catching these choice points before automatic programming kicks in. It takes about 18 seconds for an emotional reaction to peak and begin subsiding. If you can breathe consciously for 20 seconds when triggered, you create space for a different response. Working with resistance requires understanding what it actually is. That uncomfortable feeling when you try to think bigger thoughts or make different choices, that's not intuition, warning you away from something dangerous. That's your nervous system trying to keep you in familiar territory, even if that territory is limiting. Thoth's wisdom teaches us to befriend resistance rather than fight it. When fear arises about changing careers or ending toxic relationships, get curious about it. What specifically are you afraid of? Usually, it's not the change itself, but stories about what the change might mean, stories that were programmed into you long ago. Upgrading belief systems happens through consistent small choices, not dramatic overnight transformations. Instead of trying to convince yourself you're abundant while your bank account says otherwise, start with smaller bridges. I'm learning to trust my ability to create value. I'm discovering new possibilities every day. I'm becoming someone who makes decisions from wisdom rather than fear. The daily practice piece is non-negotiable. Your brain is literally rewiring itself, and new neural pathways need repetition to strengthen. Spend 10 minutes each morning in silence. Not meditation necessarily, just quiet awareness. Notice what thoughts arise without immediately believing or rejecting them. Practice feeling your own energy before the day's activities scatter your attention. Throughout the day, check in with yourself. Am I operating from programming or consciousness right now? Am I reacting or responding? Am I giving my power away or maintaining my center? These micro moments of awareness accumulate into major shifts over time. Finding community during this transition matters more than most people realize. When you're changing fundamental patterns, the people around you might unconsciously try to pull you back into familiar dynamics. They're not being malicious. They're just trying to maintain the stability of known relationships. Having even one person who understands this journey makes an enormous difference. The victim mentality deserves special attention because it's so pervasive and seductive. Taking full responsibility for your reality doesn't mean blaming yourself for past unconsciousness. It means recognizing that regardless of how you got here, you now have the power to choose differently. This is perhaps the most liberating realization possible. You're not at the mercy of circumstances, genetics, or past trauma. You're a conscious being, capable of creating new patterns. Remember, Thoth's teachings emphasize direct experience over intellectual understanding. You can read about higher dimensions all day, but until you actually practice operating from expanded awareness, it remains theory. Start small, be consistent, and trust the process. Your consciousness is already multidimensional. You're simply remembering how to access what was always there. The most practical step you can take right now is this. Identify one automatic pattern that no longer serves you, and for the next 7 days, pause for 3 conscious breaths before engaging that pattern. Whether it's checking your phone first thing in the morning, agreeing to requests before considering if you actually want to do them, or falling into worry spirals about the future. Just pause and breathe. In that pause, you'll find the doorway to everything else. You know what's fascinating about this whole awakening process? Nobody does it alone. I mean, literally, nobody. Every single person who begins operating from fifth-dimensional consciousness creates ripples through the collective field that are absolutely measurable. And Thoth understood this principle so deeply that he encoded it into what we now call the Hermetic axiom: as above, so below. But there's a piece most people miss. It's not just about individual correspondence between your inner and outer worlds. It's about how your individual frequency shift affects the entire web of consciousness that connects all of us. Think of it this way. When you stabilize in coherent 5D awareness, you become like a tuning fork that's been struck. Your frequency doesn't just stay contained within your personal energy field, it resonates outward, and other people's consciousness naturally begins to attune to that stable vibration. This isn't some mystical concept I'm pulling out of thin air. We can observe this phenomenon in everything from heart rate variability studies showing how one person's coherent heart rhythm influences others in the same room, to the documented synchronization of brainwaves between people in deep conversation. But here's where it gets really interesting. You're not trying to convert anyone or convince them of anything. That's old paradigm thinking. When you're authentically operating from 5D awareness, you're simply maintaining your natural vibrational state, and that authentic frequency acts like a permission slip for others to access their own higher dimensional awareness. You're not pushing anything on anyone. You're just being genuinely yourself, and that genuine state naturally invites similar alignment in others. There's this phenomenon called morphic resonance that explains how new patterns of consciousness become progressively easier for others to access once enough people have established them. It's like cutting a path through dense forest. The first person has to hack through all the undergrowth, but each subsequent person finds the path a little clearer, a little easier to follow. This is why you'll notice certain insights or realizations seeming to emerge simultaneously in completely different locations among people who have no direct communication with each other. The morphic field itself is carrying these new patterns of awareness, and you can see this playing out in real time right now. Ideas about conscious living, authentic leadership, regenerative business practices, collaborative governance. These concepts are sprouting up everywhere simultaneously, not because there's some coordinated effort to spread them, but because enough individuals have stabilized these frequencies that the collective field is now resonant with these possibilities. What's particularly fascinating is watching how old systems that depend on unconscious participation start breaking down as this shift accelerates. Structures based on fear, manufactured scarcity, and control only work when people unconsciously feed them their energy. But as more individuals stop participating in those frequency patterns, not through resistance or rebellion, but simply through authentic alignment with higher dimensional awareness, these systems literally lose their power source. You can see this happening everywhere if you know what to look for. Traditional media losing influence as people turn to authentic voices. Hierarchical corporate structures struggling as employees demand meaningful work and conscious leadership. Political systems based on division and manipulation becoming increasingly ineffective as people see through the theater. The resistance from established power structures isn't a sign that the awakening is failing. It's actually proof of how effective this vibrational shift really is. But here's what's really beautiful about this process. Awakened individuals don't waste energy trying to reform broken systems. Instead, they naturally gravitate toward creating entirely new structures based on cooperation, genuine abundance, and conscious choice. They're building alternative educational models that honor children's natural curiosity instead of programming compliance. They're creating businesses that serve life, rather than extracting from it. They're forming communities based on authentic relationship rather than superficial social contracts. The leadership emerging from this shift looks completely different too. Instead of positional authority backed by institutional power, you see influence flowing from embodied wisdom and authentic service. People follow these leaders not because they have to, but because these individuals have demonstrated the capacity to hold space for everyone's highest potential. Now, I know from a third-dimensional perspective, this transformation can seem frustratingly gradual. But that's only because linear time perception makes exponential change look slow until you hit the tipping points. Then everything accelerates rapidly. And we're approaching several of these tipping points simultaneously right now. This isn't just modern speculation, by the way. Indigenous prophecies, ancient wisdom traditions, even Thoth's own teachings through the Emerald Tablets, all pointed to this exact period as a time of great awakening and fundamental transformation. They understood that human consciousness plays a crucial role in planetary evolution, and that individual awakening would eventually catalyze collective ascension. So how do you contribute to this collective evolution while maintaining your own energetic integrity? First, focus on your own authentic alignment, rather than trying to wake up others. Your coherent frequency does the work naturally. Second, connect with others who are also walking this path, not to create exclusive clubs, but to establish stable nodes of higher dimensional awareness. Third, create or support systems that embody 5D principles in practical ways. Look around your community for examples of this new paradigm already emerging. Cooperative businesses, conscious parenting groups, regenerative agriculture projects, alternative healing centers, collaborative art spaces. These aren't just nice ideas. They're the seeds of the new world growing right through the cracks of the old one. Understanding this larger context provides meaning that transcends personal concerns. Your individual awakening isn't just about your own spiritual development. It's your contribution to the evolution of consciousness itself. You're literally helping to birth a new phase of human existence. And that, my friends, is perhaps the most profound purpose any of us could ever serve. Understanding these principles intellectually is just the beginning. The real transformation happens when you stop reading about fifth-dimensional consciousness and start embodying it as your natural way of being. Thoth's teachings weren't meant to be philosophical concepts you admire from a distance. They're practical instructions for radically restructuring how you move through reality. The gap between knowing and being is where most people get stuck. They have profound realizations, experience moments of expanded awareness, then wonder why they keep slipping back into old patterns. This happens because they're treating 5D consciousness like a weekend retreat instead of a complete lifestyle redesign. You can't dip your toe into higher dimensions and expect permanent transformation. Your vibrational frequency needs daily maintenance, just like your physical body needs daily care. This means establishing non-negotiable practices that keep you anchored in higher consciousness regardless of external chaos. Start each morning by consciously choosing your energetic state before checking your phone or engaging with the world. Spend 10 minutes visualizing yourself moving through the day from a place of love, creativity, and aligned action. This isn't wishful thinking. You're literally programming your energy field to operate from fifth-dimensional frequencies. Throughout the day, use decision-making as your primary spiritual practice. Before making any choice, ask yourself, does this align with my highest timeline? Does this decision come from love or fear? Am I choosing this because it's what I truly want, or because I'm trying to please others or avoid discomfort? Every decision becomes an opportunity to either reinforce your new consciousness or slip back into old programming. The challenges during this transition are predictable and manageable once you understand them. Doubt will arise because your logical mind hasn't caught up with your expanded awareness yet. When this happens, don't try to convince yourself through mental arguments. Instead, focus on the tangible improvements in your life since you began applying these principles. Document synchronicities, improved relationships, creative breakthroughs, and moments of profound peace. Your results become your evidence. Fear often surfaces as you start living more authentically because you're stepping outside society's predetermined scripts. People around you might react strangely to your changes, questioning your new perspectives. or trying to pull you back into old dynamics. Remember that their resistance isn't about you. It's their own fear of change being triggered by your transformation. Stay compassionate but firm in your commitment to growth. Social pressure becomes intense when you stop participating in collective unconsciousness. You might find yourself uninterested in gossip, drama, or complaints about circumstances beyond anyone's control. Some relationships will naturally fade while others deepen. This isn't loss, it's alignment. You're making space for connections that support your highest expression rather than drain your energy. The temptation to revert to old patterns during difficult periods is perhaps the biggest challenge. When faced with crisis, stress, or unexpected obstacles, your nervous system wants to default to familiar responses, even if they're destructive. This is where your commitment gets tested. Instead of seeing challenges as evidence that this path isn't working, recognize them as opportunities to practice mastery. How you handle difficulties from fifth-dimensional consciousness becomes proof of your growth. Create an environment that supports continuous expansion. Your physical space should inspire creativity and peace, rather than stress and distraction. Surround yourself with beauty, nature, and objects that remind you of your highest vision. Your information diet matters enormously. Stop consuming content that reinforces limitation, fear, or victimhood. Choose books, conversations, and media that expand your awareness and support your evolution. Establish routines that reinforce your new consciousness. This might include morning meditation, evening gratitude practices, regular time in nature, creative expression, or movement that connects you with your body's wisdom. These aren't rigid rules, but supportive structures that make higher consciousness your default state, rather than something you have to constantly remember to access. Service becomes a natural expression of fifth-dimensional awareness, not an obligation. When you're aligned with your true nature, helping others awaken feels effortless because you recognize their struggles as your own former limitations. Share your experience through whatever feels authentic: conversations, creative work, professional skills, or simply modeling what's possible through how you live. This journey never ends because fifth-dimensional consciousness isn't a destination you reach and then maintain. It's a continuous deepening into greater authenticity, creative power, and loving presence. Each level of mastery reveals new possibilities for growth. Celebrate your progress while staying committed to further expansion. Notice how your capacity for joy, creativity, and positive impact keeps expanding as you embody these principles more fully. Thoth's ultimate teaching is that you contain the divine spark capable of creating reality through conscious choice and aligned action. This isn't metaphorical. It's the fundamental truth about human consciousness that's been hidden behind layers of conditioning and limitation. As you reclaim this power, you're not just transforming your personal experience. You're contributing to humanity's collective evolution toward greater wisdom, compassion, and creative potential. Your awakening creates ripples that touch everyone around you, giving others permission to step into their own power. This is how the world changes, not through force or manipulation, but through individuals choosing to embody their highest potential and inspiring others to do the same. Start today. Choose one area of your life where you'll begin applying these principles immediately. Make one decision from fifth-dimensional consciousness. Have one conversation from authentic presence. Create one thing that expresses your true nature. Take one action that aligns with your highest timeline. The window of opportunity for this transformation is open now, but it requires your active participation. You can't remain passive and expect change. The universe is waiting for your conscious choice to step into the reality you came here to create. If this resonates with you and you're ready to begin living from fifth-dimensional consciousness, comment, "I understood it" below.